Daniel Richardson had secretly begun trailing his black cleaning lady and her children after work, and what he discovered brought him to tears. Standing behind the curtain of his private office, he peered through the bulletproof glass as Carmen Santos slipped 3 cans of food and a bottle of children's medicine into her worn-out bag. It was the 4th time in just 2 weeks that the automated inventory system in his mansion had registered small discrepancies, always at the same times, always linked to her access card. At 41 years old, Daniel had created a medical technology empire valued at $2.3 billion, and he hadn't reached that level by missing details or blindly trusting people. Every dollar was monitored, every employee tracked, every system optimized to perfection. And now the woman who had cleaned his home for 8 years, the same woman who knew every corner of his mansion, every habit, every private detail, was taking items out of the house. Carmen, a 54-year-old mother of 3 adult children Daniel had never cared to learn about, possessed an uncanny skill for keeping his 15-bedroom mansion spotless while remaining nearly invisible. She arrived every day at 7 a.m. without fail, left precisely at 4:30 p.m., and during those 9 hours existed only as a quiet shadow, except for the red alerts that flashed on the control panel. Daniel watched her now as she folded towels with her usual military precision, as if nothing unusual was hidden in her bag. What disturbed him wasn't the cost. Those supplies were insignificant to him, things he would never notice missing. What unsettled him was the silent betrayal, the misuse of trust, the realization that someone he believed he compensated generously was deceiving him. As soon as Carmen switched off the kitchen lights and headed toward the staff exit, Daniel already had his car keys in hand. Not the Bentley chauffeured for him, nor the Tesla he used for meetings, but the gray Honda Civic hidden in his garage for emergencies, the one no one associated with the CEO of Richardson Global. 20 minutes later, he followed her discreetly from 3 cars behind as she guided her aging 2008 Corolla through dimmer, narrower streets. Daniel had never set foot in this part of town, not because of prejudice, but because he had simply never needed to. His offices were in the financial district, his lavish mansion sat in the wealthiest suburbs, and everything in between existed only as locations on his GPS. Carmen parked in front of an aging apartment complex built in the 1970s, looking as though time had forgotten it. Daniel stopped at the end of the street and watched her climb the exterior staircase to the 2nd floor, her heavy bag swaying at her side. After waiting 10 minutes, he moved closer. The lobby had a broken intercom and smelled like fried food mixed with cleaning chemicals. Through a narrow hallway window on the 2nd floor, he spotted Carmen inside a small apartment setting out plastic plates on a folding table. 2 children, a boy around 10 and a younger girl, sat waiting in mismatched chairs. Only then did Daniel understand. She wasn't taking food for herself. She was bringing supplies from his overstocked pantry to feed her children. And something about the way the boy gazed at the canned soup as though it were treasure twisted something deep inside Daniel's chest. Still, Daniel Richardson wasn't the type to act rashly. For 8 years, Carmen had possessed unrestricted access to his home, his personal records, and daily routines, information that could be worth millions if misused. If she was willing to take food, what else might she be capable of? And more importantly, what parts of the lives of his employees had he never bothered to understand? That night, as he drove back to his sprawling, silent mansion, Daniel made a decision that would change the course of everything. He would uncover the entire truth about Carmen Santos, not only about the missing items, but about the person she truly was when she wasn't vacuuming his Persian carpets. What he never could have predicted was that by digging into the hidden side of his housekeeper's life, he would end up uncovering something far more unsettling about himself. If this tale of surprising revelations has sparked your interest, Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to see how a simple suspicion turned into a truth that would shake the foundations of both their worlds. The very next morning, Daniel arrived at his office 2 hours earlier than usual. Not because he had urgent appointments or critical calls to make, but because he had barely slept at all. The image of those 2 children staring at a few cans of soup as if they were birthday gifts had lodged itself in his mind like a stubborn virus that refused to go away. He opened Carmen's employee file in the human resources system. 8 full years of service, not a single unexcused absence, evaluation scores consistently marked as excellent. Monthly salary, $2,800. For him, that was the kind of money he might spend in a single night out at an upscale restaurant. For her, apparently, it was still not enough to properly feed her kids. Daniel typed the address he had memorized from the previous night into Google Street View. The apartment building looked even worse under the simulated daylight. Walls with peeling paint, rusted stair railings, windows patched up with strips of tape where glass should have been. He clicked on an option to check average rents in that neighborhood and almost choked on his coffee. Even in a place as run-down as that, a 2-bedroom unit cost around $1,400 per month. He did a quick calculation in his head. After paying the rent, Carmen was left with $1,400 for food, transportation, clothing, medicine, and every other expense 2 children might have. Divided by 30 days, that meant less than $47 a day for 3 people to survive on. He snapped his laptop closed as if slamming it shut and could somehow erase the math from his memory. For the rest of the morning, Daniel was incapable of focusing on anything substantial. He canceled 2 scheduled meetings and sat staring out his office window instead, watching the people passing on the street below like distant, tiny ants. For the first time in many years, he wondered how many of them went back to homes where they had to decide between paying the electricity bill or buying groceries. At 1:30 p.m., he acted on an impulse. He drove to his mansion, parked across the street, and waited in his car. Carmen arrived right on time at 2 p.m. for her afternoon shift. She worked part-time in his house and likely had another job somewhere else to make ends meet. He watched her walk through the staff entrance, carrying her battered bag and a school backpack that he knew could not be hers. Using the property's internal cameras, Daniel saw her go directly to the guest bedroom that almost never had anyone staying there. She took 2 school notebooks out of the backpack and carefully placed them on the bed alongside a few pencils and a small, worn eraser. At that moment, he finally understood that Carmen was using his house as a study space for her children. While he was at work, they were doing their homework in a room that he practically never thought about. For 8 years, 3 people had been living overlapping, parallel lives inside his own property, and he had never truly noticed. Daniel felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. Not exactly guilt, but a deeply uncomfortable realization that maybe he was the type of employer people whispered about when they shared bad stories about their bosses. He pressed the intercom button connected to the house system. "Carmen, could you come to my office?" 5 minutes later, she appeared at the doorway. Hands still damp and smelling faintly of cleaning products, her expression cautious and slightly apprehensive. "Is there something wrong, Mr. Richardson?" she asked. Daniel looked at her, for the first time in 8 years. Carmen had fine lines around her eyes he had never paid attention to before, and her hands looked older, more worn than her 54 years might suggest. She stood with her back straight, but there was a faint heaviness in her shoulders, the kind that comes from carrying burdens for far too long. "Please, sit down," he said, motioning toward the chair in front of his desk. Carmen hesitated. In all the years she had worked for him, she had never once sat in his presence. "Please," Daniel repeated more gently. She perched on the edge of the chair as if she might bolt at any second. "Your children do their homework here," he stated. It wasn't phrased as a question, but Carmen swallowed hard as though it were. "They stay quiet, Mr. Richardson. They don't disturb anyone, I swear. It's just that there isn't a peaceful place for them to study in the apartment where we live." Carmen blinked, genuinely startled that he knew anything about her address. "It's an old building," she explained. "The walls are thin, and there's always noise, all the time." Daniel nodded slowly in understanding. "And what about the food you've been taking home?" he asked. The color drained from Carmen's face. She twisted her fingers together in her lap and lowered her gaze. "I can pay you back," she murmured. "You can deduct it from my paycheck." "I'm not asking you to reimburse me," he clarified. "I'm asking why you had to resort to that." She lifted her eyes, confused by his calm, almost neutral tone. "Why didn't you ask for help? A raise? An advance? Something?" Carmen gave a short, bitter laugh with no trace of humor. "Mr. Richardson, with all due respect, men like you don't usually appreciate people like me asking for more than what we already receive. I learned a long time ago that it's safer to solve your own problems quietly." Daniel felt those words strike him like a physical slap. Men like me, he thought, wealthy, powerful, so used to seeing people like her as part of the furniture, useful as long as they function, invisible the rest of the time. The silence between them grew dense and heavy, almost tangible. Carmen rose from her chair. "I'll gather my things and go," she said. "You don't have to pay me for the rest of the week." "Sit down," Daniel ordered firmly. "I'm not finished." She obeyed, but lifted her chin with a quiet dignity he had never noticed in her before. "In 8 years, you've never caused any problems for me," he continued. "You've never been late, never left your work unfinished, never complained about anything, and during all that time, you were raising 2 children on a salary that barely covered the essentials." Carmen remained silent, offering no excuse. "It makes me wonder," Daniel went on, "how many other people working for me are in the same position? How many other Carmen Santos exist in my company, in my world, that I simply never took the time to see?" He leaned forward slightly. "And it makes me question what kind of man that turns me into." Carmen studied his face carefully for a long moment. "An ordinary man, Mr. Richardson," she replied. "Most people live this way, only noticing what directly affects their own lives. The difference is that you actually have the power to change things, if you choose to." Daniel nodded slowly, feeling something solidifying inside his thoughts. "Carmen, I'm going to adjust your salary, and I'm going to change some company policies, the way everything works," he said. "You don't need to do charity on my account," she protested. "This isn't charity, it's making things right," he answered. He paused. "But first, I need to fully understand what's going on. Would you allow me to really get to know your children? Maybe have dinner with you?" Carmen stared at him as if he had suddenly started speaking another language. "You want to have dinner at my house?" she repeated. "If you're willing to invite me, yes," he said. She stayed silent for so long that Daniel began to worry he might have offended her somehow. Finally, Carmen nodded once. "Saturday night, then," she said quietly. "But don't expect anything fancy." When she left his office, Daniel remained seated, looking at the closed door and realizing that he had just made the most significant decision of his recent years. And what truly scared him wasn't what he might find out about Carmen and her children, but what he would inevitably uncover about himself. Every new realization only reinforced an uncomfortable truth he hadn't been ready to confront, that after so many years of chasing money and influence, he might have completely lost the ability to truly see the people keeping his world running from the shadows. The following Friday, Daniel arrived at the company with a sense of determination he hadn't felt in a long time. During the previous night, he had made a decision that could transform not only Carmen's future, but possibly the lives of hundreds of other employees as well. He needed facts, real data, not just assumptions born from a guilty conscience. At exactly 8 a.m., he called in Rebecca Torres, his human resources director of 15 years. If anyone understood the real conditions of the staff, it was her. "Rebecca," he said, "I need a full survey. Wages, cost of living, benefits, and the family situations of all support workers. Cleaners, security staff, maintenance teams, kitchen employees." He insisted, "I want real numbers, not polished summaries," making it clear he wasn't interested in pretty spreadsheets. Rebecca arched an eyebrow. In a decade and a half working with him, Daniel had never shown the slightest curiosity about the intimate realities of his lower-paid staff. "Is there some specific issue?" she asked carefully. "Just do it, please." "And quietly," he replied. By 11 a.m., Rebecca was back in his office with a folder thick enough to make Daniel's throat tighten. Of the 47 support workers employed by the company, 31 received less than $3,000 a month. 15 of them held second jobs to make ends meet. 8 lived crammed into apartments shared with more than one family to divide expenses. 3 still showed up to work even when ill, simply because they could not afford to lose a day's pay. "Daniel," Rebecca said gently, sitting down with deliberate care, "in 15 years you've never asked me about any of this. Why now?" He shut the folder and fixed his gaze on her. "Rebecca, did you know that Carmen Santos lets her children study at our house? That she takes food that would otherwise be thrown away so she can feed them?" "Yes, I knew," Rebecca answered without a pause. "I also know that Luis, the night security guard, sleeps in his car during the day because he shares his apartment with 2 other families, and that Maria from the kitchen sells part of her diabetes medication just to buy school supplies for her granddaughter." Daniel stared at her, stunned. "And you never told me?" "Daniel," she replied with weary honesty, "with all due respect, when was the last time you showed any interest in the personal life of someone who isn't on the executive floor?" She sighed. "To you, they're invisible. They always have been. Not because you're evil, but because you live in a completely different universe." To the remark hit Daniel like a fist to the gut. He was one of the country's most successful entrepreneurs, yet he was realizing that he knew absolutely nothing about the people whose labor sustained his success day after day. "I want you to set up a meeting," he said at last, his voice steadier than before. "All support staff in the main conference room, Monday at 4 p.m. "Daniel, that's going to terrify them. They'll assume they're being laid off," Rebecca warned. "Then make sure they understand that's not what this is," he answered. "And Rebecca, I also want a full review of our operating expenses. I need to know exactly how much money we waste on unnecessary luxuries compared to what we invest in human beings." That Saturday, Daniel drove toward Carmen's address with a knot of nerves twisting in his stomach. He had faced ruthless investors, negotiated multi-million-dollar contracts, and spoken at international conferences. But the prospect of sitting at a humble table with 2 children made him more anxious than any boardroom confrontation. Carmen opened the door wearing simple jeans and a plain t-shirt, no trace of the work uniform he was used to seeing. "Right on time, as always," she said with a small, reserved smile. "Thank you for coming." The apartment was immaculate, every surface clean, but Daniel's eyes now saw past the orderliness. An old television with a warped picture tube, a couch with cushions carefully positioned to hide rips in the fabric, and a folding table serving as the primary piece of furniture in the room. "Mr. Richardson," a young voice greeted him. Daniel turned to see a boy of about 10, thin but with lively, intelligent eyes. "You must be David," Daniel said. "Yes, sir," the boy replied. "Mom said you own the house where she works." "That's right," Daniel confirmed. "And you?" "I'm going to be an engineer," David announced with the absolute certainty only a child can have. "Like you?" "Actually, I'm a businessman, not an engineer," Daniel corrected gently. "Why do you want to be an engineer?" "Because I want to build houses that don't fall down when it rains a lot. Our last house collapsed," the boy said simply. Daniel felt his chest tighten. "When did that happen?" he asked quietly. Carmen appeared from the kitchen balancing a tray. 2 years ago, she explained. "The building was old. The structure gave way during a storm. We lost almost everything." "And your daughter?" Daniel asked, noticing the absence of the second child he had seen from afar that first night. "Sophia is next door at the neighbor's place, doing homework with her friend," Carmen replied. "She's 10, but she's shy around people she doesn't know." Carmen set the tray on the folding table. "It's nothing fancy, just like I warned you," she said, revealing chicken stew, rice, and beans. As they sat down to eat, Daniel listened and asked questions, and during that simple meal he began to learn details about Carmen's life and her children that shook him far more deeply than any quarterly report ever had. David was the best student in his class at school, but he had no computer at home to do research, so he relied on the public library computers on weekends. Sophia adored drawing, yet she used ordinary notebook sheets because real sketchbooks were too costly. Carmen worked 6 days a week, and on top of her hours at Daniel's house, she cleaned law firms 3 nights a week. "Why did you never come to me for help?" Daniel asked, genuinely puzzled. Carmen and David exchanged a brief look. "Mr. Richardson," Carmen replied calmly, "people like you usually help causes, not individuals. You donate to organizations, sponsor charity galas, but actually looking someone in the eye and asking, 'What do you need?' that is rare." Daniel remained quiet, letting those words sink in. After the meal, while Carmen washed the dishes, David proudly showed Daniel his school notebooks. They were filled with neat notes, sketches of machines and math calculations surprisingly advanced for a 10-year-old. "Where did you learn this?" Daniel asked, pointing at a complex equation. "YouTube," David answered. "There are lessons about everything there, except sometimes the internet goes out and then I have to wait." At that moment, something hardened into certainty in Daniel's mind. What he felt wasn't pity, but anger. Anger at a system where a gifted child like David depended on an unstable internet connection to study, while Daniel routinely spent more on wine each month than Carmen's entire household earned. When he said goodbye that evening, Daniel already knew precisely what he would do on Monday. "Carmen," he told her at the door, "on Monday at 4 p.m., we're having an important meeting at the company with all the support staff. It's not about firing anyone, it's the opposite. It's a change, a big change." Carmen looked at him with curiosity. "What kind of change?" Daniel gave her a genuine smile, one she'd never seen from him before. The kind that should have happened a long time ago. On the drive back to his mansion, Daniel called his personal accountant. "Mike, I need you to calculate something for me. If I raise the salaries of all support employees by 50%, what impact does that have on the annual budget?" "Let me check. Around $400,000 a year," Mike replied. Daniel almost laughed. $400,000 was less than the price of the watch he wore on his wrist. "And if we double them, a 100% increase? That would be about $800,000 a year. Run the numbers to implement that starting next month. And Mike, I also want to set up an education fund. Full scholarships for employees' children who want to go to college. Do you have a budget limit in mind for that?" Daniel pictured David explaining equations in a crumpled notebook, dreaming of building houses that wouldn't collapse. "No ceiling. No child of any employee of mine will miss college just because of money." When he ended the call, Daniel understood he was about to make changes that would not only transform lives but also completely redefine who he was as a human being and as an entrepreneur. For the first time in years, he truly felt excited to go to work on Monday. What he still did not realize was that his choice to finally see the people who kept his empire running would expose much deeper truths about inequality, dignity, and what success actually means. Truths that would reshape not just his company, but his entire view of the world. On Monday at 4 p.m., Daniel walked into the main conference room and saw 47 support employees seated on chairs that probably cost more than their weekly wages. The tension in the room was almost tangible. Many of them had never set foot on that floor before, let alone sat in the space where million-dollar deals were negotiated. Carmen sat in the third row, hands folded in her lap, her face cautious. Beside her, Louise from night security tugged nervously at a borrowed tie, and Maria from the kitchen looked around as if she were touring a museum. "Thank you all for coming," Daniel began, skipping the microphone and standing right in the center of the room. "I'm aware that many of you are anxious right now, wondering whether you did something wrong, whether you're about to be dismissed. The answer is no. None of that is happening." A low murmur rippled through the crowd. "In reality, I'm here to apologize and to correct mistakes that I should have addressed a long time ago." Daniel switched on the projector. The first slide displayed a simple spreadsheet comparing current wages with the local cost of living. This week I discovered something truly alarming. I learned that 31 of you earn less than $3,000 a month, that 15 of you are forced to work 2 jobs, that 8 of you share apartments with other families just to afford rent, and that 3 of you come to work even when you're ill because you cannot afford to lose a day's pay. The silence in the hall became absolute. I found out that Carmen uses my house as a study space for her children because there is no quiet corner in the apartment where they live. That Luis sleeps in his car during the day because he shares a room with 2 other families. That Maria sells her own medication so she can buy school supplies for her granddaughter. Carmen's eyes widened as she understood how far Daniel's investigation had gone. For 8 years, Carmen has worked for me with flawless performance. No errors, no lateness, no complaints. And throughout all that time, she was taking leftover food that would have been thrown away to feed her children because her salary was insufficient. Daniel's voice grew steadier, more resolute. "That ends today. Not because I'm some kind of saint, but because I've realized I've been a hypocrite. I speak publicly about medical technologies that save lives while the very people who sustain my life struggle just to get by." He advanced to the next slide. "Effective immediately, every support staff member's salary will be raised by 100%. We are doubling your pay starting this week." A choked sob escaped from somewhere in the audience. Several people covered their faces with their hands. Carmen leaned forward, unable to believe what she was hearing. "Second, we have created a robust educational fund. Any child or grandchild of an employee who wishes to attend university will receive a full scholarship. Tuition, books, housing, everything included." Luis from security began to weep openly. "Third, there will now be comprehensive family health insurance, including dental and mental health care, for all of you and your families. No co-payments, no waiting periods, no complicated bureaucracy." Maria, from the kitchen, suddenly stood up and rushed out of the room. Daniel hesitated for a moment, worried, but Rebecca gestured for him to continue, knowing Maria had stepped out simply to cry in private. "Fourth, we will create an on-site daycare center for employees' children, because no one should ever be forced to choose between working and taking care of their kids." Daniel fixed his gaze on Carmen. "Carmen, you will take charge of a new division. Employee welfare. Your new monthly pay will be $8,000, with a clearly defined career path. Because someone who can raise 2 exceptional children on $2,800 a month obviously understands how to manage resources better than any MBA I've ever hired." Carmen pressed her hands to her chest, tears filling her eyes. "But there is one condition," Daniel added, his tone turning even more serious. I want you to help me identify other companies, other environments where this same situation is happening. Let's create a movement, not merely an internal policy." He went to the final slide, showing a photo of David proudly displaying his math work. This is David, Carmen's son. He wants to become an engineer. His dream is to design houses that don't collapse when it rains. He's only 10 years old and is already solving equations that I myself can't solve. Yet, he was studying in a crumpled notebook because his family couldn't afford proper school supplies. The room remained utterly silent, broken only by quiet sobbing. "David will go to the best university in the country with the most complete scholarship I can provide, not as an act of charity, but as an investment in the kind of person this world truly needs, and the same will apply to all of your children." Daniel switched off the projector and walked over to Carmen. "Carmen, will you accept the responsibility of leading this department? Will you help me reshape this company into the kind of place where our children would be proud to work one day?" Carmen rose to her feet slowly, tears running freely down her cheeks. For a brief moment, the two of them simply stared at one another. 8 years of being unseen and overlooked finally being repaired and acknowledged in a single instant. "I accept," she said at last, her voice trembling, "but only on one condition." Daniel lifted an eyebrow, genuinely taken aback. "That this isn't driven by guilt or pity," she continued. "That it isn't framed as charity, but as a recognition that we have always been worthy of dignity, and that you are only now choosing to notice what has always been in front of you." Daniel inclined his head and extended his hand toward her. "Deal," he replied. As their hands clasped in a firm handshake, the entire room broke into applause, the sound echoing down the corridors and prompting other employees outside to stop what they were doing and wonder what important event was unfolding. Later on, after everyone else had left and the conference room was empty, Carmen stayed behind. Daniel was gathering his documents and closing his laptop when she walked up to him. "Daniel," she said softly, using his first name for the very first time since she had started working for him. "Why did you do all of this? I want the truth." He paused for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Because I finally understood that I was building an empire on top of the invisibility of extraordinary people," he admitted, "and I realized I would rather be remembered as the man who decided to open his eyes than as the man who chose to look away." Carmen's lips curved into a smile filled with a kind of inner peace Daniel had never seen in her before. "You know," she said, "in 8 years of working for you, this is the first time I've truly felt like I was working with you." That evening, Daniel picked up the phone and called David. "David, it's Mr. Richardson," he said. "You told me you want to become an engineer." "Yes, sir," came the boy's eager reply. "Then get ready," Daniel said warmly, "because we're going to build houses together, and they're never going to collapse." On the other end of the line, he heard David shouting with pure joy, calling out for his mother and sister to share the news. It was the sound of hope turning into reality, and Daniel understood in that moment that he had finally discovered what real success meant. What he did not yet realize, however, was that this single decision, to truly see the people who had always sustained his world from the shadows, would set off ripples far beyond his own company, inspiring a quiet revolution that would transform the way thousands of previously invisible workers were treated across the country. The transformation was only at its beginning. 6 months later, Richardson Global had become a case study at Harvard Business School. Daniel appeared on the covers of 3 major business magazines, celebrated as CEO of the Year. But what filled him with the greatest pride was not the awards. It was the framed photograph on his desk of David, now 11 years old, presenting his engineering project at a science fair at the best private school in the city. Carmen now directed a department of 15 people, traveling to different companies throughout the country to implement policies centered on labor dignity. Luis, from security, had finally been able to buy his first home. Maria had paid for her grandson's much-needed surgery. In total, 47 families had seen their lives changed in a profound way. The movement they started had inspired 200 other companies to reevaluate and adjust their wage structures. Daniel began receiving letters from workers all over the country, many of them saying the same thing in different words. "Thank you for seeing us." "You know," Carmen remarked one day as she walked into his office, "you didn't exactly change the world." Daniel looked at her with a questioning expression. "You just decided to notice the world that has always been there," she finished. And she was absolutely right. The greatest discovery he had made was not solely about economic inequality. It was about shared humanity. For years, Daniel had achieved professional triumphs by overlooking the very people who helped make them possible. Now he understood that real power did not lie in having subordinates, but in having partners. The most meaningful kind of revenge against social blindness was not punishment or public shaming, it was awakening. And waking up to the humanity we share with others is the only form of success that truly counts. If you believe that every person is inherently worthy of respect and dignity, subscribe for more stories that reveal how seemingly small choices can transform entire lives.